So this talk is on server-driven UI. I just did a hackathon project on this, so I figured I could kind of demo it here and talk about it further. Cool. So what is server-driven UI? Basically, my own definition is kind of moving your UI's control from your front-end client to the back end. So the back end has more control over what the UI looks like. So I think there's multiple levels of server-driven UI. Like you have your basic static apps all the way to the left that are just static UI. Then you have a more traditional, like what you're used to, level of server-driven UI, which is the server sends you data, you format that data, and spit it out into a UI on the front end. So the back end is sending you like business objects that the front end decides what they look like. And then you go a little bit further to the right and you have templates where you have like specific, like predefined UIs that the server is capable of telling the front end to display. Like maybe you display a title item that has a title and a subtitle. The server could say display this, and the front end would take that and spit that template out. Then you go a little bit further right, you have elements where the server says, hey, I want a button here, I want some text here, I want an image here. So it's a little bit more dynamic than templates, and the server has more control over exactly what that UI looks like. Then if you want to get real crazy, you can start thinking about HTML. Probably don't want to do that. Or even if you really wanted to, you could have the backend tell you what to draw on the canvas, which is crazy, but is possible. So traditional apps with client server is probably what most people are used to doing. The app makes an HTTP request to a backend. It processes that data and displays it in like a predefined UI in the case of Android, like an XML layout or something like that. So the app entirely controls the UI. The backend just gives the app data to plug into that UI. The backend has pretty little control over the UI outside of what data is being plugged into that predefined UI. Then if you move on to templates, this is what I would consider as like, this is now server-driven UI. The rest isn't really server-driven UI, but the backend has more control over the UI in this model. The app provides like UI templates for the backend to work with. So the app can say, here's a title view, here's maybe a card for something that the app needs to display. Like maybe we're talking about like a checkout, a shopping app that displays an item with some details under it. It's a very like predefined UI for the backend to spit out. And at this point, you kind of move from business objects to UI objects being provided by the backend. So before your backend, let's talk about a player. Your backend might hand you a player with a name and a bunch of other details, like maybe points and that kind of stuff. But now you're shifting more to, I need UI objects. So I have a header, here's my title, which would be the player's name. Instead of points, it might be subtitle or more like UI specific items rather than like business specific items. So kind of an example of that, this is a platform by Airbnb called Ghost Platform. The JSON in the middle is not, I just made that up, but it's kind of illustrating the way Ghost Platform for Airbnb works. On the right here, they have like these predefined templates, like toolbar section, hero section, title section. You can see that how that like maps into this finished UI on the left here. So your home details section is this entire cottage hosted section. So the backend has the capability to provide these different sections in different orders, and really maybe they want 10 title sections or 10 home details sections, but gives a lot more control to the backend in that way. And this is just kind of JSON data that I just threw together of what this might look like from the back end. Like you have a page, and then a toolbar section with whatever data that needs. A hero section might have like an image and some overlay text. Title section would have like a title and then a subtitle. You'd probably have some representation of your stars and that kind of stuff. Then if you move to elements, this is server-driven UI at a more fine-grained level. So it gives the backend even more control than templates, because essentially the backend can build whatever it wants. It can build a layout that has 10 images in a row, 10 buttons in a row, or basically whatever it really wants to. So in this way of working, you would define a schema contract for building UI that is shared across your backend and all clients. So there's some work that goes into like managing that contract and defining what that looks like for you. And then kind of you can take this a little bit too far. Like you can server drive absolutely everything. I think that's a little bit overkill. You probably need to think about the right balance and in your use case, what you need to do. Like it might make sense to use more template driven UI or by elements, but it's possible to build an entire application in a completely server driven UI way. And some people do that, but kind of just have to decide what works best for your use case. At FanDuel, one of the things it really makes a lot of sense for is like after entering a contest, we want to display different things to the user. Like if they enter a contest with a player as their MVP, we might want to show some UI around like doubling down on that MVP and placing a bet on them through Sportsbook or things like that. But that gives you a lot of control over what that user sees after they enter a contest, so you can really customize it to the user. HTML, don't do that. You don't want to reinvent a web browser. You could just serve up HTML from the backend and display it in a web view or something like that. But you lose out on a lot of the benefits of being native when you do that. Some of the pros are like instant updates. You update something on the back end and all your clients have a brand new UI instantly. You don't have to go through like app store submissions or anything like that. Cross-platform. So a lot of the business logic and work to display the UI is shifted from the front end to the back end. So you're saving some work there and makes it a little bit easier to consume functionality on the front ends. It's really powerful for like experimentation, flagging, and customization. Like I was saying earlier, a user enters a contest, you might want to look at some of their analytics data, and based on some of the other actions they've taken, you might want to display a different UI to them to do different actions. So that's really powerful to be able to make those decisions on the back end and serve a UI that is customized to your user. And it's still native. Like this is still regular Android, iOS buttons. It's not a web views or anything like that. Some of the cons are there will be some challenges like offline, and when you're building really complex UIs, it can be, there's definitely added challenges. Schema upkeep. So you definitely want to make sure that all platforms, the backend, everything's in sync on the way the schema looks, and you're going to be adding to that schema. So there needs to be some process around that to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then UI actions can be a challenge. Like if you have a button that needs to do different things, it can be tricky to define that in a way that can be provided by the backend. Like if you're opening specific activities or you need to open a web URL or other things like that. So that's a little bit challenging. Can be done though. And I do think that server-driven UI can be overdone and it won't particularly age well because you're building like your own like view system in this case, and you have to kind of keep that up to date on the platforms. And I definitely wouldn't recommend trying to server drive everything. You got to find like that right balance for you and where it makes sense. Now we'll go into a demo. So this was my hackathon project at FanDuel. And so what I have here is I chose to demo the elements approach of server-driven UI. So this dynamic UI module is basically all the brains of it. So if you come in here, we've got a canvas. Canvas is kind of the top level thing, and it takes an element. So you just, and this is all Jetpack composed, by the way. So you've got anywhere you want to inject server-driven UI into the app, you would just say, here's a canvas, and then that canvas would take server-driven UI and build out that UI in the way that the server defines. So all it takes is a root element. And basically all of our server-driven UI components are this element. So it makes the decision if we have a column, a row, if we have some text, if we have a button, then it makes a decision of what it needs to spit out. So we have two types of elements here. We've got container elements, which map to basically Jetpack composed columns and rows. So that gives you the capability to display stuff either horizontally across the screen or vertically. And those elements take in some children, which is also a list of elements. So you can nest columns and rows together to build fairly complex layouts that way. But looking at element itself here, it's just a sealed class. So you have primary text, highlighted text, secondary text. You've got a button, image, separator. And these were just during the course of the hack day, I just defined some random elements here for building UI, but this can be really anything you want. So as you saw for a second there, let me build this again. I've got some Jetpack Compose previews over here. Actually, they're not in this one. They are in my canvas. So I've got some previews of some different UIs that are server driven. So the way this works here is, let's look at recommended Dart contest. That's the bottom one here. So I've just got a canvas that provides a preview route. You look at that preview route, it's just it's a column at the, or actually we've got a row at the root level, and then it has children of a column, which has children of another row with, we've got text, so that's where you'll see, gotta switch back over here. So these are the texts that were over there laid out, and like these two are in a row within a column to stack these vertically. And then here's another row with a button over here. So let's go to right now. I've got this powered through remote config. I was just looking for an easy way to output some JSON from a backend. So if you look over here, I'm going to go ahead and run this while I'm showing this. So it's ready. Cool. So this is just a remote config that's serving up some JSON. If you look at the JSON, this is displaying, this is configuring what should be displayed in your server-driven UI. So same kind of thing I was just showing, except this is a JSON representation of it. You've got a children array on your row that's showing an image, another column, and some text. So I'll show you what that looks like over here. This specific JSON is this top section here. So you can kind of see how it maps out. You have a row, then you have an image as the first child. So your row is going left to right here. Then you have a column, which is stacking these two texts here, double down on Luca and Doncic's 25 points. Let's go ahead and just add one in here. So if we wanted to stack another item vertically here on the back end, it's as easy as just changing what it returns with properly formatted JSON. Let's say that on Luca. And we'll save that and publish from remote config. So now the backend is going to serve us up this new JSON, and you see bet on Luca populates in there. So that's how easy it is to change the UI from the backend without requiring any updates to the app or anything. So that's pretty powerful. But you can configure whatever you want here. If you want to completely make that UI section something completely different, just change it out and it'll work. But yeah, here's an image, text. This is a button. If you click the button right now, it just launches a web URL into Sportsbook. But you can make it do whatever you want, really. So like I was saying, this is the library. So this is pretty generic. You could bring this into any app and you could have this capability to build these out. But if you look at from the app side, so most of it's in this compose activity here. And here we've just got like a hard-coded column. None of this is server driven. This is where I was saying, like, you have a canvas, you use a canvas when you want to supply an area to the backend to do whatever they want with the UI. So in my previews here, let's see, this first one is I'm just providing some mock repos. So it's essentially providing the same thing that my Firebase remote config is and previewing it out in Jetpack Compose. So you've got two server-driven UI canvases in this particular layout. Cool. Well, that's pretty much all I have. If you guys have any questions.
I think you haven't had a chance to really push this to its limits on the Play Store yet to see how much you can change before they get upset that like this is not the app I approved.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think you'd really run into many issues on Android side. I know people are doing this on the iOS side, and I don't know. I could imagine though that probably Apple before Google might not like this the most. But yeah, this is definitely, this is just a demo. This is not, we're not something we're actually using in prod right now. So I'd love to build it out more and actually take advantage of it. But we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Have you identified if your schema works well on iOS, or is that if you get buyout, you would identify if it works well on iOS?
Yeah, that's definitely something you'd want to think about. Like this was just a 1 day hackathon where I definitely tailored it towards Android, but like if we were to move forward and actually use this, we would definitely want to consider uh, iOS as well and make sure that we're coming up with a schema that works well for all platforms.
I like the way that it's just an element in Compose. That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, Compose maps really well to server-driven UI. It was pretty easy to do.
So you called out that the actions for the buttons could pretty much do anything. How difficult would it be to have those actions defined in the JSON?
Yeah, so right now it's pretty much only capable of launching a deep link, which in our app is actually quite a bit. Like you can deep link into different pages this way. But you could really make this do whatever you want as long as you come up with the schema for it. So like I said, right now I have deep link action, but you could come in here and build out your schema or your button, or I'd probably recommend like separating out actions from your elements. So any element can have these actions, but um, you would basically just need a schema for the backend to communicate what action needs to happen, and then you would need to support that action on the client.
Yeah, at my work, we actually do a light amount of server-driven UI on our homepage of my app. And essentially what we do is we get just a data object that essentially is, it contains the URI, the type, and then I think, yes, those two things. So like we handle situations like, is this an so the type would tell us whether it's an internal URL or not. Because if we're a healthcare app, so if you link outside of our app, we do a prompt. So the type would tell you, hey, we need to show the prompt here. Or certain things go to custom Chrome tabs, and then certain things go to certain things are just deep links, like he's saying here, and it's kind of nice. It works really well, and we can, like anything that supports deep links, we can support within our app, and anything that is a web link, as long as we're cool with opening it in a custom Chrome tab, works well. And eventually, we might support like a custom web view or something like that. But as of right now, we don't have a web view in our app.
Yeah, I think where it might get interesting is like you want this button to launch a camera, or you want this button to launch a share intent, or things like that. You'd have to like build out custom things each time you come across something like that.
Some of the interesting things that come up is you need to build your server-driven code to be extremely protective for backwards compatibility, which is interesting. So if you receive an action type that you don't support, you just like you need to define rules of how you handle that. So I don't remember. I think for actions we just ignore it, but and we display it. But like there's if we were, I think we version our types. So we receive a root like type. We do the template version of yours. We don't do the object. But if we are adding a new action that we've never supported before, we add a new type, and any new types as like a root template object gets ignored. So we just like on the home screen, we just won't show it until they update. It's kind
Yeah,
of
that makes sense.
we need to deal with all these weird edge cases because otherwise you'll receive a new type and crash, or it'll work crappy or whatever.
Yeah, definitely have to have the discipline to not like change your contracts on existing stuff so you don't cause issues. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, like we just set up as a rule that we version everything. So but yeah, I guess you don't really have versions here with the specific things. I think probably adding versioning might be a good idea to find a way to say, hey, or you're gonna have to force your users to update, or another thing you could do is have the server control what it returns to the front end. That was something we suggested. So like, don't return something that the front end doesn't support. You send some sort of version, and then basically never sends that to the old clients. But we couldn't get that sold, so
Yeah.
we had.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a concept of like externalizing your template engine too, to where like I don't know how you would do it exactly, but basically have an external template engine where the app talks to that, so it knows how to use certain templates and build things out based on that template engine, and then have that like extracted away, I guess. But that seems like a really tough and interesting problem, but I
Yeah,
suppose that
like
would be possible.
so you're saying like something like it goes to the template engine and it knows your version is X. So for this action, we know you don't support that. So the backwards compatibility version of this is going to fall back to redirecting to Chrome or something like that. Like let's say if you didn't support custom contact or something like that, that's interesting. The thing that happened at work is I started right after they defined the contracts, but then I like immediately changed everything. I was like, no, like we want to make it. So.
Yeah.
We're cool with changing it to like a middle ground between templates and elements, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I find that all of this really interesting. The next big milestone for SwiftCurrent is going to be server-driven workflows. So it's not to this extent. It would be more focused around that action to some extent. Much more closer to the template side.
Sure. I think that seems to be the way that most companies are going, that start using server-driven UI is more the template approach.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
know. There's definitely not much out there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
yeah, I was just saying, yeah, like I think what you're seeing in your presentation is a good middle ground there, like because like kind of what the original contract that was proposed was essentially titles were embedded in like a template rather than just so like you couldn't just have a random like line of text, and I'm like, why don't we just make this a random line of text, because there's nothing around it. It doesn't need to be embedded in an object, so then we can randomly throw a random line of text wherever we want. We had a lot of things that controlled the size of things too, so it's pretty nice that they have that flexibility to just throw it in there. But like your example is better in certain aspects because we don't have a padding element. So the padding between everything is uniform. But so far we're just using that one page.
Gotcha. Yeah, I threw padding on there because that's something that seems to be used all the time. But this could be built out to take any Jetpack Compose modifier, and that would be, I think that would be super powerful.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that works with iOS and making sure those abstractions work well in both places. Did you look at I'm having a brain fart. Did you look at the iOS the server driven UI of the iOS engineer that we work that's also an organizer? I'm forgetting his name.
Parshav?
No, the I'll get his name.
Oh,
Zach.
oh, Zach. No, did he do one?
Yeah, well, he did some sort of server driven UI. They him and Parshav wrote a whole app in server driven UI, the whole app, which is nuts. And
Nice.
it's open source. At least they're it'd be interesting to see how that lines up with the choices that you made. If they went more template route or if they went more element route.
Yeah, that'd be cool to see.
I'll find the